Well, as to, you may recall, to wrap up or summarize what has happened so far, I did two videos, the first of which was to hypothesize this psychotronic reactance of a psychotronic circuit such as John Shizuka, friend to John Bedini, and try to ponder and conjecture the beneficial application of one simple little component of the circuit, namely how it goes about grounding itself so that the operator does not become affected. And the best I could determine as a consequence after, as a consequence of further experimentation after making that first video, is that I was a little concerned that everything seemed to be in reverse here, that I was using, or John Shizuka used the positive terminal of a D-cell sized dry cell battery rather than the negative in order to shield the operator from the loop that forms the karmic loop of action and reaction, in which the psychotronic circuit sends out its influence, and then it comes back upon the circuit and might affect the operator. Well, it actually will, it has to affect the operator if it is not grounded to the positive pole of a dry cell battery. And John Shizuka used a D-size dry cell battery for that purpose, which just happens to be the largest mass of a low voltage, 1.5 volt dry cell battery. Well, I figured out one problem I had. Why is it positive and not negative? And I was assuming that it was the negativity of the environment, trying to balance the psychotronic circuit. In actuality, it's not that at all. What it is we have the circuit, and then we have the environment. That part was obvious. But what was not obvious is that the operator is not part of the circuit. The operator is part of the environment of the circuit. So the operator is in the negative field in contradistinction to the circuit, which is being grounded to a positive polarization of charge, of dielectric charge, since there's no, explicit strong connection here with the negative pole of the battery, like a traditional circuit will do, because we're just grounding it. The circuit already has its own circuitous loops of current flow and whatnot, and I believe he even plugged it into the AC outlet to operate it. I can't remember how it was powered. In any case, it's a standard circuit with all kinds of vacuum tubes that are specially designed and whatnot, but the grounding link is a open path. So anyway, the operator is part of the environment of the circuit in contradistinction to the circuit itself, and that's why he chose to use a positive pole of the dry cell battery to ground the circuit to, the psychotronic circuit to, is because he wants the circuit to be grounded to a positive polarization so that the environment immediately surrounding the circuit is negative. And that's what the operator is part of, the environment of the circuit. And so the operator will be negative, which is where the way we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be negative. When we ground ourselves to the earth, we ground ourselves to a negative reference, in contradistinction to the atmosphere that we walk around in is positive, in contrast to the earth's negative voltage difference from the atmosphere. And so for health, we always, we go and buy negative ion generators for that reason, to boost the negative charge of the air above ground level surrounding our body. Or we go and stand next to a waterfall, or we take a shower, and the falling water creates negative ions. In any case, that takes care of the confusion as to why the positive pole of the battery, because what I did was I connected myself to the positive pole of a battery, grounded myself at the same time, and that gave the maximum benefit of the wrong polarity. It's the correct one if I suffer from PTSD, which I do. That's what drives me, is I have an aggravated condition, post-traumatic stress of losing my son, in which I've fallen into this hole, this trap, shall we say, that is very difficult for me to extricate myself from, in which I'm constantly stressed over having lost him. And that drives me to perform voluntary service to try to help, other people, because I can't seem to help myself. So, I think it worked. It created enough good karma that I figured out what the problem is, electrically speaking, and figured out electricity, which I'm going to explain to you. It's very fascinating what I figured out. And it helps explain the backdrop behind the free energy circuit that I've managed to stumble in my way into. But all because I tried this psychotronic idea that came to me, because I was afraid I was going to die of a stroke, because I was pushing myself. I was taxing myself to the limit, and I've been doing it for like 3 years now, intensely studying various free energy simulations to try to come up with a free energy circuit entirely by way of simulated design. But also now, in the aftermath, trying to understand the how. How is it that it works and creates free energy? But I'll get to that in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I figured out this psychotronic circuit grounding situation that was bothering me. Why is it grounded to a positive pole, which sets up obviously a contradistinction to the negativity of the environment surrounding it? Now that it's grounded itself to a positive reference, this negative reference of the dry cell battery is left disconnected from just about everything, and so it creates an ionic channel with the environment, which causes the environment to be loosely coupled to this negative pole as a negative or an extension, as the environment is an extension of this negative pole, in contradistinction to the psychotronic circuit itself, which becomes positive, connected to the positive pole. Well, when I connected the positive pole of a battery to myself while being grounded to the earth, at first it was very calming. And of course, somebody who suffers from PTSD, it would be, because it's the opposite thing you're supposed to do under normal conditions. 99%, according to Leon Ernest Eman, who invented biocircuitry, although he didn't call it that. I don't think he called it anything. But Peter Lindemann rediscovered, because his knowledge died with him. He had no followers. He wrote a book, but nobody paid attention. But Peter Lindemann paid attention, bought the book, read it, and revived it, brought it out of the graveyard where it went and died with Leon, and brought it out and studied it for 10 years in the 1970s, and then talked about it and shared his knowledge. And so it's only because of Peter Lindemann that we know anything about Leon Ernest Eman. Well, and then gave it a term, or the people who actually transferred the knowledge of Peter Lindemann, I forget their name, they wrote a book. It was a husband and wife team, and they called the book Biocircuit. And so that's where we came to know the name Biocircuit. It's not the same as a psychotronic circuit, as John Shizeka's invention. This is totally different. But it's where I figure out polarity, because it goes in conjunction or in parallel, similar to the work of other people who have studied the polarity of the body and have mapped out the voltage gradient of the body. It's the same. Head is positive, tail is negative. Right side, if you're right-handed, the right side of your body is positive, the left side is negative below the neck. And above the neck, it's inverted. Above the neck, again, for right-handed people, above the neck, the right side of the head is negative and the left side is positive. If you're left-handed, the right and the left are swapped. But if you're PTSD, everything gets swapped. Top to bottom, left to right, the whole schlemiel. And it's a condition, according to Leon Ernest Eman, that only affects 1% of the population. He didn't call it PTSD. Nowadays we call it PTSD because we recognize it. We still have yet to define it electrically, but Leon Ernest Eman already did. He already defined it electrically. What you do about it, though, is you give the body the opposite of what you would normally do when it was healthy. In other words, you mirror it. You give it the same unhealthy state. You give it positivity at the head instead of negativity, and negativity at the tail, or negativity at the tail instead of positivity, because you don't want to create balance. You want to exacerbate the imbalance, and the body in the state of an exterior stimuli making matters worse than they already are will stop trying to maintain the PTSD condition, which is why people suffer from PTSD, because their body maintains it. Their subconscious is terrified of losing that condition. It's already stressed out of its gourd and terrified as it is that they have everything turned around. They don't know what normal is. Their subconscious does not know what normal is, and so it fights to defend its abnormal condition. Well, the only way to correct it is to superimpose upon it more of same, to build up the amplitude of that imbalance. And then the subconscious recognizes its error, the error of its ways at some point, and corrects itself and flips back to normalcy. But that's the only way to treat it, is to do the opposite of what you would normally do. So this is what happened. I was gravitated by intuition to investigate this psychotronic circuitry concept of how to ground a psychotronic circuit of John Shijeka, because I'd always, in the back of my mind, I always pondered, that seems to be the only part of the circuit, the grounding to the D-cell battery, that would be of any interest to me. But I never pursued it. Until now, I realized I need to pursue it. And then I realized it's the opposite of what I should be doing. But it was the correct. It's not the opposite, because at first it was the correct thing to do. The problem was, well, initially it was not a problem. It made me feel very calm, because it was reaffirming my PTSD condition. One of the problems of PTSD is affirmation. They never get it. They always want it, but they seek it from normal people who give them the opposite of what they need. They don't need normal people. They need somebody just like themselves to make matters worse. And yet they never go to the right person. They go to the wrong person, somebody who's normal. and they end up infecting them with their condition, if they're a domineering personality type, which normally PTSD is. So all they do is spread around the infection, and nobody figures out how to correct it, unless, of course, they just somehow correct it spontaneously without realizing how it happened. I did, in a sense, but only while I took the time and trouble to investigate, well, what's going on here? So when I connected myself to the positive pole of the dry cell battery, I was making matters worse. But I didn't know it, because it felt so good. It must be the answer to my problems. And yet as the hours went on, it started to dawn on me about, I want to say, well, it's less than 24 hours, so let's say 18 hours later, I noticed myself becoming drained of life force, even though I was experiencing all this calmness, and oh my God, it feels so good. I was calm because I was draining myself. I was killing myself. I was draining out the life force, because that's what, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I learned the first step. It was the first step of my learning about the correct knowledge of electrodynamic theory, is that the positive pole of a dry cell battery is a sponge for electrons. We call it, it's called something in electrodynamic theory when you look at the two plates of a capacitor. One is the donor electron plate, and the other is the something else that has these vacuoles, these holes that want to receive electrons. Well, that's what the positive pole of a dry cell battery is. It's a sponge that's dry in respect to the fact that it lacks electrons and would love to have some come and visit and occupy those empty holes, those empty vacuoles. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's get back to the biological implications. So the positive pole will drain you of life force, And if it feels good at first, that means you needed it. That means you were stressed into a PTSD modality of getting everything backwards and subconsciously defending your condition, which just maintains it. But you drained yourself of life force, and at some point you realize your mistake if you keep it up. Even though you're experiencing all this bliss, the bliss is the bliss of death, is what it is. It's a death process. You're draining yourself of life force. What's the opposite of life force? It's death. So that's where the bliss comes in, because all of your passion is being drained from you, and along with the ability to apply yourself in a passionate manner in the wrong way, against your dharma, against at a cost. You're spinning your wheels, but what are you producing? Well, I got something out of it, is what I'm getting to, but I'm trying to put it off a little bit to dwell on this part first. So I realized I had to try the opposite and see how it works. And at first, it didn't seem to do much good. I flipped my connection to the battery. I flipped the battery over in my earthing connection to the earth. I flipped it over so that I would be connected to the negative pole rather than the positive. And at first, it seemed like it wasn't doing any good. And I was still in this death trap, this spin dive of killing myself, of draining life force from me. But it was just that it didn't take effect right away. That was the problem. But I was patient with it, and I waited, and I realized I'm okay now. I don't have the numbness building up in my left arm, indicating to me that I'm losing my life force and bringing on a potential stroke. So, you would here I thought it was going to prevent it, right? And I'm just making matters worse. But I was getting all this bliss. So at first I thought I was doing the right thing. But eventually I realized my mistake. And normally karma, when we have to do with hatha yoga, the manipulation of the body and the life force in the body, the karma usually runs a cycle of just under 24 hours. When I was a kid doing wheatgrass after a long fast, I found it was exactly 22 hours. In this case, it was a little less than that. It was more like 18 to 20 or 16 to 18, somewhere in that vicinity. I don't know exactly what, in which I came to my senses, so to speak, and realized my mistake, and I needed to flip it around the other way. It might have been closer to 22. It might have been 20 to 22. In any case, the point is I switched, and I've now been several hours. It's been about 7 hours since I switched, and the numbness in my left arm is practically just about gone. And the bliss is too. So, but only the strong component of bliss. What comes in its wake is the realization of the correct view of electrodynamic theory, which I'm almost about to get to, because I'm almost finished with this part. So now you know what to do under what circumstance. If you're loaded with stress, then you connect yourself to the positive pole of a dry cell battery, and you connect yourself to the earth at the same time, and you just be with that for several hours. And it'll probably calm you down, and then you realize you're making a mistake at some point, and then you switch to the negative pole of the dry cell battery. Or you do away with the battery altogether. Your choice. I'm still not clear on that part yet. It's still a little too early for me to tell. But the positive pole is merely temporary benefit if you're stressed over PTSD, if you're stressed over this condition that's subconscious that is basically in a state of panic all the time and maintains that panic all the time. That's what PTSD is. You're in a state of fear, and it becomes so customary to your sensibility that you don't know any differently. You think it's normal for you to be subconsciously afraid all the time. I learned all this by having a girlfriend who's now my ex, who is in this state and doesn't know how to come out of it. When an earthquake happens, a mild one, she gets terrified. She's, it doesn't take much to terrify her, and that's why I had to leave her, because she was stressing me out over losing our son to a much greater degree than, I was handling it fine. I just went and hung out with meditators, and I was okay. But it wasn't enough. She was way beyond help. She just sunk deeper and deeper into a state of fear. Be that as it may, I learned about PTSD firsthand by having her as a friend, as a girlfriend. And I was studying Leon Ernest Neiman at the same time. So I kind of got a little glimpse of what PTSD, in terms of the voltage gradient of the nervous system, what's normal, what's not normal, because Leon didn't talk about it in terms of PTSD. He just said it's 1% of the population who has their polarity flipped, totally flipped. Unlike left-handed people who are only laterally flipped, PTSD is both laterally and vertically. PTSD sufferers are flipped, but it's a temporary condition. And that's why I made a video several years ago, and now it's gone because it used to be on my Vinyasi YouTube channel, in which I hypothesized that left-handed people are born that way because they were PTSD in their prior incarnation. And out of grace of Mother Divine, she gave them this left-handed condition in which they are only partially flipped. Maybe they sought remedy, and that was some good karma, and so they got themselves halfway out of the hole, so to speak. I don't know, but it has something to do with recovery of a PTSD condition. It's so bad it might even follow you one lifetime after the next, that you never seem to get out of this fearful condition due to, horrible stresses happening lifetime after lifetime. Life can be pretty shitty. And it can be pretty habitually shitty. And it's very hard to rise out of it. Anywho, so now I think I've covered all of that physiological, psychological aspect of the polarity, the voltage polarity, the voltage gradient polarity of the body that Dr. Robert Otto Becker talks about in his book, The Body Electric. And there are other people, I forget their names, who study the regeneration of the body and the regeneration of salamanders and whatnot also, and frogs. They know about this polarity of the body. So Leon Ernest Neiman, maybe he was the first, but there have been other people since him who have replicated that aspect of the knowledge, at least that part, the mapping part, although Leon did something about it, and he wasn't trying to regenerate the body. Well, he was regenerating the electrodynamics of the body is what he was trying to do, trying to correct it and enhance it. And he enhanced his own. He made using a biocircuit will enhance your dowsing ability, your ability to be sensitive to electrical polarity at the physiological level of your whole nervous system, so that you literally start to learn about these things firsthand. Your perception gets shifted and changed. It's quite an interesting thing to put yourself through. And I enhanced it even more so than most people, because I went ahead and I took 3 daisy chain modules of Eric Dollard's analog computer in LMD mode and hooked it up to an biocircuit. And I made some mistakes in the beginning that weakened my heartbeat, but I learned never to connect a capacitor laterally. I learned to connect it vertically or diagonally, and that's okay. And that's how I learned how to connect the daisy chain of LMD modules of his Eric Dollard's analog computer, the one that he told us about from his Borderland videos days, how to connect it to the biocircuit to enhance it. And I literally was inducing a hibernation state in which I went into a deep sleep because my dream state was suppressed. And so I skipped right past the dream state and went straight to deep sleep state. And I would stay in about an hour on average, sometimes 4 or 5 if I really needed it badly, but generally about an hour. And I was catching up on my sleep. But I could only do it in the daytime because it was suppressing my dreams. So I still had a dream, so I would do it only in the daytime for 1 or 2 sessions, usually with just 1 session, and then I'd go to sleep at night. And I'd do my twice-a-day meditation as well. So I was spending a lot of time resting. But I needed it. I had been stressed. I'd left LA full of stress over losing my son. So I did that, and after about 5 or 6 weeks, um, I reached a climax in which I was totally caught up on my fatigue. And the last session I did was, well, my circuit broke afterwards, and I never bothered to fix it for quite a number of weeks. I was so lazy about it and so fulfilled. But the last session just before it broke, the connections internally, because it was kind of rinky-dink the way I put it together, masking tape and aluminum foil and glass plates and whatnot. It was really weird, but it worked. And what happened during that last session was I did not fall asleep. Yet I was in that state that Leon Ernest Eman calls a trance state. That's what he calls it when he does the session. He calls it a trance state. I literally had transcended. I had experienced samadhi, transcendental consciousness, not for a few moments, let me see, what was it again? I believe it was 2.5 hours is what I estimated. Because I was in the session for 3 hours. I got up, I looked at the clock, and 3 hours had passed. Yet I could only account for 1/2 hour. That's what I thought the session was, a half hour. And so what I extrapolated from that was that it took me 15 minutes to get into that state and 15 minutes to come out of it, that I was just lying in bed, and not realizing that I was coming out of it. Because I was having thoughts. And when you have thoughts, the clock is ticking. Your internal bio clock is ticking. But when you're in the state of transcendental consciousness, there is no clock. You go beyond time. And you transcend time, let alone space. You transcend everything. And so you lose time is what happens. But I did not lose consciousness. I was totally awake and aware that I was awake the whole time. And that's the condition of transcendental consciousness, in which you transcend thought itself, let alone awareness of the body. Your senses shut down, so you're not aware of your environment. That's called pratyahara, I believe. In the process of meditation, your senses shut down, and so you become oblivious to the world. But you still can be thinking inside. Well, when you transcend thought itself, now and if you remain awake and not fall asleep, now you are in the state of transcendental consciousness, also known as samadhi. And that's what happened for 2.5 hours. I was awake the entire session, but I was without thought because I had lost time. My sense of time for 2.5 hours. I could not account for what happened to that 2.5 hours. It went bye-bye. But I didn't fall asleep, so I know I didn't lose it to sleep. And that's what was boggling me at first. But see, it's only because of the knowledge that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi gives to his meditators to understand the process so they don't flip out and misunderstand what happened. And also the experience and the ability to have the experience that here I was, meditator since the age of 16, and there I was in my 50s performing these biocircuitry experiments. And after that many decades of meditation, my body had pretty much gotten accustomed to transcending, although I seem to have transcended less often in my older age, and I kind of miss it. But it was familiarized with the process. And so when I induced it kind of spontaneously, kind of bumbled my way into it by this modified biocircuit, it didn't surprise me too much. I mean, it did surprise me that it was such a lengthy transcendence. That was phenomenal. But it didn't shock me or disorient me for too long, because I, just thought about it and I realized what had happened and calmly accepted it, that it was a good thing, nothing to knock. So that's the backlog of all this awareness I have about what has happened recently with this experiment of mine. So I found an easier way to do, a simpler way to do the same thing, a biocircuit in which you simply, because I was always grounding myself. That's the one thing I did. Leon Ernest Eman did not push grounding, even though a friend of his suggested it, that why don't you ground while you do your biocircuit session. But I always, as a matter of course, I never thought twice about it. I always grounded while I was doing a biocircuit session, because it's only better. It can't, it's unthinkable not to do it. So I retain the grounding aspect, and then I simplify the polarization aspect to the point that, okay, positive pole of the dry cell battery is good, but only for limited duration when you're very, very stressed and need that kind of influence to bring you down to earth, so to speak, because you're just push, 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 active, active, because you're a squirrel running in a cage, terrified of some boogeyman or something that's going to go and bite you and bite off your head. And yet you're running from demons. They're ghosts. They don't exist. Yet you're terrified. And so you do that kind of thing in an extreme sort of way to get over that, and then you don't do it because you would just make yourself near death, if you kept doing that, draining away your life force. And then you can switch to either a negative pole of the battery or do away with the battery altogether. I don't know which, so that part is in abeyance. I still have to determine which is the case. But now we get onto the theory, and this is so fascinating. So let's get a clean canvas. I don't know if I need a canvas, quite frankly. I've figured out the 4 quadrants of electricity, the 4 quadrants of an AC cycle, the various power factors. We have 3 different power factors, one of which comes in 2 forms. The 0 power factor is either capacitive reactance or inductive reactance. And then we have negative power factor and we have positive power factor. And the 2 0 power factors are actually imaginary or complex values to what is going on. That's why they're capacitive reactance or inductive reactance, because the complex number system is involved of values. While the negative power factor and the positive power factor quadrants of the AC cycle, they're the real numbers. They're the real values, positive and negative values, real numbers. And it was always kind of elusive to me, what do they represent? What are they? And what was also elusive to me was Edward Leedskalnin. He came up with a theory of electricity. Oh, I have to change the size of my canvas here. He came up with a theory of electricity that's very intriguing. He says there are 2 types of magnetism, and they rotate in a circuit in opposite directions. One goes one way and the other goes the other way simultaneously. And the one going one way is composed of north monopolar little magnets, while the other one going the other way is composed of south pole monopolar magnets, little tiny magnets circulating around inside the circuit in opposite directions. And they're monopolar. They have only one pole to each of them individually. Together they create the dipole situation of an electric circuit, a live circuit. Well, I come now to understand that's not the whole picture, but it certainly is a step in the right direction of filling in the gaps to our knowledge about electrodynamics. So let's draw a circle of an AC circle to help put things in perspective. A nice AC circle. Okay. And then let's draw quadrants. Imaginary quadrants. Actually, they should be this way. Yes, more like... now, mind you, what I'm drawing is an esoteric symbol that's actually tamasic. It's destructive. I got that out of a book that I read back in the late 70s. So if we do one line, that's actually maintenance. The letter M, maintaining creation, on and on and on. That's the sound, the phoneme M, as in Mary. But when we do a cross, I believe it's the G sound, and that puts a stop, as Maharishi says. It stops something, which is tamas, whereas the M is rajas. It maintains. So that's 2 of the 3 gunas right there. Whereas if you don't have any cross and you have a dot in the middle, that's O, the sound O, and that's sattva. That's the initiation of a process. So right now you got the three gunas for free in terms of the three phonemes O, M, G, which is a Greek word, omega, the first and the last. But those three sounds of O, M, G are the three gunas in phonemes in terms of, Sanskrit is a power language, and all the sounds have meaning at a very atomic level of that language. Anywho, but I'm using this not for that, but as a construct, a conceptual model of the AC cycle. So, and I did it this way because I want to put positive power factor at the top. So let's write that in. Positive power factor. Now, then we'll put negative at the bottom. And by the way, the book I got, that knowledge about the three gunas, is actually a sequel to the first book. The first book was called A Dividing of the Way, was the main title, and then the subtitle was An Earth Dweller Returns. And Philos, P-H-Y-L-O-S, the Tibetan, is the author, but the amanuensis is Frederick S. Oliver. He died in 1899 at the age of 22. He, through automatic writing, wrote this book, whose author lives on Venus. That's the backdrop behind that book. And you don't find out about that until you get to the second volume, I think. The second volume. It might be in the first, but I can't remember. The first volume is huge. But the publisher, a Los Angeles publisher, changed things in that book and started this trend of thinking that there's something called your soulmate, when in reality he was screwing with the public. He was changing the text posthumously. His mother published it posthumously through this publisher who changed the text to sell more copy. And it made it very romantic, but it's it's not what was written. What was written is that the soulmate is simply your soul. And that's your mate. That's really all it was. And he made too much out of it. In any case, good grief. It's the relationship between the soul and the higher self. That's the mate of the soul, is the higher self. The Atma is the mate of the Buddhi, the soul, the Buddhi. The mate of the Buddhi is the Atma. And that is the ideal mate of the soul, is the higher self. The guardian angel of the soul is its ideal companion. But he changed stuff and created a fiction and sold more copy. So the Lemurian Fellowship Foundation, located, I believe it's in Ramona, actually, they published the second sequel or edition to correct the mistakes of the first and add extra material. So it's an interesting anthology between the two of them. I can't remember the title of the second book. And it's written not like the first. It's not a narrative style. It's more like just bullet points, kind of raw data just thrown in there. And you just have to assemble it in your mind, all these pieces of information to help fill in the gaps that the first book had created by one means or another, either because it was missing or because it was messed up by the publisher, the LA publisher. Anyway, so that's the backdrop to that symbol. Anyway, okay. So here are two real values, real number values. They're not complex. They involve no imaginary component whatsoever. And so let's do a different color. Let's do gray. Let's do gray for capacitive reactance over here on the right. That's not dark enough. Let's do a different color. Let's do brown. Okay. And this is 0 power factor. One of the two zeros, in which capacitive reactance is the telltale sign. Its complement, we will make, well, we'll make it brown. What can I say? Keep things simple. And let's put that over here. I think I need to make some room over here. This has to be moved. Because I might want to write something else in here. I did not plan ahead. Okay. So now we got our 4 quadrants of the AC cycle and the 4 types of power factors. Now, there's a very interesting situation about this. We normally define current in terms of voltage, and that's where we screw ourselves. We're merely talking about the positive power factor when we do that. We say that current flows. Let's draw it. Let's draw blue. And let's make a bar graph. And let's fill it. And then let's do red. Fill it. And then we got to do currents. So let's choose green. So what we normally say, get a brush. Let's get a big brush. What we normally say is that current wants to flow from, I want to get my crosshair. Current wants to flow from an area of high voltage towards an area of low voltage to equalize them. That's positive power factor. But that's only one of 4 different types of current. This is what I'm getting to. There are 4 types of current, and that's only one of them. And that's what's finally learned out of this experiment with a battery. It's unbelievable how things can come to you under the weirdest circumstances. Because what do? In negative power factor, it's reversed. So let's see, this one is, let's do a brush and let's do black. And let's lasso this with a very thin lasso. This condition is what happens. Oh, you know what? This should be pink. I knew I wanted pink for something. All right. So let's lasso this with a pink lasso. Ooh, I lost my lasso there. Doesn't matter. You get the idea. Okay. So that's positive power factor. When current wants to flow from an area of high voltage to an area of low voltage to equalize them, to balance them. But that's only one type. So now, I should have copied that first. Well, I got to go copy it now. So let me copy this ever so carefully. Okay, copy, paste. Now let's put that down over here. Yeah, I'm going to have to put it here. Okay, and then I copy the arrow, because I want to keep this arrow. I don't want to have to redraw it. Now let's flip him. Where are we? Flip horizontally. There we go. So now we have a negative power factor in which current wants to flow from area of low voltage or no voltage towards an area of high voltage. And let me tell you, in my simulation, it actually ends up flowing from an area of zero voltage to an area of high voltage, from the starter coils to the main motor coils. So, I mean, that's, well, that's what I'm supposing, see, that it's flowing in the opposite direction. All I know is that the starter coils become predominant in current, while the main coils become predominant in voltage, and the starter coils have no voltage whatsoever. It's all current, while the main motor coils have dominantly voltage but a little bit of current, which kind of makes you wonder, where's the current? If it's coming from an area of zero voltage, it can't possibly be doing this thing. And so what it tells me is the current is actually in this area, or is it in the area of no voltage? See, this is, okay, let me just continue with what I'm doing. So a positive power factor, the current is determined by the voltage. I'll have to take a guess that a negative power factor is the other way around. The voltage is determined by the current, because the flow is totally different. It's backwards. So let's lasso the negative power factor. And that's what a negative power factor is. So it could be that cause and effect have swapped, in which the normal current flow of a positive power factor, like a flashlight circuit, the current is determined by the voltage. But in a negative power factor, the voltage is determined by the current. So that might explain why the current causes the voltage to continue to deplete. See, under normal power factor situation, let me get my crosshair back here. In a normal power factor situation, a positive power factor situation, the current flows only until the two areas equalize in voltage, and then it stops. But in a negative power factor, it keeps going. And so instead of it being equal voltages, now you get no voltage at the source of the current and a buildup of voltage at the destination. So it goes beyond balancing and is completely opposite of positive power factor. Now with capacitive reactance versus inductive reactance, we have a different situation. We have two other types of current. Let me see if I can remember this now. I didn't write it down right away. Let's see. I got so busy with talking about these other things. Let's see if I can remember what it was. Oh dear. I think what it was there's no voltage. It's current without voltage. That's, I think, what it was. And now we get into what Edward Leeds-Collin was talking about. The monopolar North Pole, South Pole situation. Because he excluded voltage from his definition of current. It was like, that was it. It was an effect, not a cause. So actually, what I guess I'm getting to here is that three of these four quadrants, the voltage is the effect and not the cause. And only the one we harp on all the time, that it's ideal for the consumer, that's the only one in which voltage is the cause and the current is the effect. But in these other three, it's turned around. That's what it's starting to look like. The current is the cause and the voltage is the effect. And in the case of inductive and capacitive reactance, there's no voltage that is the effect. It's not tied to current at all. And that's why we say it's complex. It's in the complex field of complex numbers, and it's not real anymore. because it breaks the tie between current and voltage. You know, Ohm's law is all about real numbers, you know, in its simplest state. It's this positive power factor of real numbers in which current times voltage equals wattage, or the other simple relationships of Ohm's law that involve only real numbers. But when we get into imaginary or complex, it's the voltage is no longer tied. And then when we get to negative power factor, it's tied again, but in an inverted situation. Now the voltage is the effect and not the cause. But in inductive reactance and capacitive reactance, there's no tie between them at all. So it's this kind of no man's land, this middle ground. So it's not that 3 of the quadrants, the voltage is the effect. It's that it's not even there at all. It's not even tied. It's a separate phenomenon. Voltage varies independent of current. Ohm's law no longer applies, at least in the real number sense of the term. It doesn't. That's why it's called reactance. And that's why it's called zero power factor, because it has zero value. At least negative power factor, you can do something with it, even though electrical engineers by training are trained to believe it's not practical. You can't. How do you create it? So what's it good for? My circuit creates lots of it. But a zero power factor is actually useless. We can all agree, whether we're into free energy or whatever. It energizes coils, so it's not useless. You just can't spend it. But you can use it to energize coils. And yet, inductive reactance and capacitive reactance are the two parents whose daughter is negative power factor. So you see, there is another a good use to put them to, is to create negative power, in which voltage is the effect and current is the cause. Anywho, so that's where I think Edward Leedskalnin comes into the picture. He's talking about reactance. And his two monopoles, his north monopole and south monopole, of two currents that go in opposite directions, he's talking about capacitive reactance versus inductive reactance. They go in opposite directions. And they are current flowing in the circuit. But they are irrespective of voltage. They have nothing to do with voltage whatsoever. They don't affect it one way or another. They're cool to it. And voltage is cool to them. And that's my realization that I wanted to share with you. It's not much. It's, in a nutshell, it's pretty simple. And I guess if we were to do bar graphs, the bar graph would be that the current flows not from or to one area of voltage to another based on their difference in amplitude, but tangential. In other words, it doesn't link them. And that would indicate that it has no link to voltage. It just flows, and it doesn't impact voltage one way or another, bad or good, hot or cold. So that's why I can't really draw a bar graph, because there's no relationship between voltage and current. Yet, what would be the difference between them? There must be a way to define, what's the difference between inductive reactance and capacitive reactance? Well, we know what the difference is. In an AC cycle, it's a question of which leads the other in time, or lags the other. So with capacitive reactance, the current leads the voltage, while with inductive reactance, the voltage leads the current. And we call that situation, back EMF, it's dragging the current. It slows it down. While with a capacitor, it speeds it up, speeds up the current, and pushes it ahead by a quarter cycle of the AC cycle. But that doesn't... So there is a relationship, but it's a time relationship, and it's not a cause and effect relationship. It's just a relationship of time. Well, it's not cause and effect. It's a mutual cause and effect. It's quite equalized at that point. Neither is the cause of the other's effect. They simply are shifted in time by a quarter cycle. So that's really the only way to... I don't know how you would depict it, quite frankly. So I won't bother. I just explained it because we already know it. I'm just repeating what we already know. But it is 4 different types of current. And that's the focus, is the current. So electrodynamics, oddly enough, or at least in with respect to the AC cycle and the 3 types of power factor, and their 4 quadrants that they consume of the AC cycle in terms of a conceptualization, it all boils down to current. What type of current are we talking about? And there's 3 or 4, depending on how you want to get into it, types of current to talk about. And they are distinct. You know, we're not talking about 4 modalities. We're talking about 4 different currents. You know, it's not that we have only one child and the child has a blue face one day and a red face the next and a green face the third day and a black face the fourth. No, it's not the same child with different faces. It's 4 different children is what it is. Now, maybe he can masquerade as 4 different children even though he's only one child, but the point is the masquerade is convincing enough that in terms of at least my analysis, it looks to me like 4 different children. It may be it's 1 and 4 or 4 and 1. But the fact is, when they interact or flow in a circuit, you're going to get, well, let's see. There's only 3 options, isn't there? Because, well, no. Actually, I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, I don't know how to deal with that. So I don't know. So I'll just say it's 4 and 1 or 1 and 4. It's either just 1 or it's 4. I won't try to define that. I'll leave it alone. Okay, that's enough then, because that's really all I got inspired to understand. So I can't speculate. I work purely off of inspiration. If it doesn't come to me, I don't know. And I'm in no position to speculate because I have no training. And it's better for me that way, to stay a little numb, and to stay a little dumb, to stay a little ignorant, until I find out otherwise. And then I share it with you. I covered a lot of stuff in this video. Some of it practical, and some of it theoretical. But it helps me understand free energy better, because if I take the position that there's not one type of current behaving 4 different ways, it's simply 4 different currents, and each one is distinctly unique. Because idealistically, that is the case. Now, in the real world, it may be a mixture, you know, which one is dominating and so forth and so on. But in terms of conceptualization in an idealistic setting, such as what a simulator affords me, I like to think of it as 4 distinctly different types of current. And they cannot be confused with each other. They're very distinctly different. But that may not be in the real world. It may be a mixed up hodgepodge. I don't know. Because, you know, we never get a purely positive power factor or a purely negative power factor or whatever. You know, there's something else that confuses me. An electrical engineer defined negative power factor in terms of capacitive reactance is dominating over inductive reactance, which lends the possibility of us inferring that a positive power factor is when inductive reactance predominates over capacitive reactance. And that may be true. It could be that positive versus negative power factor is that mixture already, even in an idealistic setting of conceptualized models. So we already have a blend right in front of our face. So this dominates down here. So what we can do is get a light green And okay. And then tie them together. Where's my crosshair? Okay. Tie them together. Oh, that's what I should have done, a figure 8 when I want to lasso them. And then use a light blue to lasso these two. I knew I wanted to say something else. That was it. So, sorry. So a negative power factor is wherein capacitive reactance dominates and positive power factor, inductive reactance, dominates. So when most people want to deal with coils, you know, in some manner to create free energy, they're dealing with a positive power factor. But I stay in the realm of the negative power factor, which means the capacitor is king, not the coil. And the coil is just a means to an end to support the functionality of the capacitor in that circuit, which is the king. So the coil is the queen, shall we say, and the capacitor is the king. But in a positive power factor free energy style circuit, the coil is the king. And if there is any capacitor, the capacitor is the queen, playing a supportive role. I always suspected there was more than one type of free energy circuit. It was pretty obvious to me. I couldn't have been the only one to stumble on just one type. But I guess that's it. It's just two types. So we'll leave it at that. And that should top off this video, which I think is a pretty cool way to end this video, actually.